Friday.
Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee, we're reconvening Council Bill 22-0235, Ordinance of Estimates for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2023. Mayor Costello, Councilman from the 11th District, Chair of the Committee. To my right, Councilwoman Danny McCray, 2nd District, Member of the Committee. To my left, Councilman Isaac Yotzi Schleifer, 5th District, Member of the Committee. Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District, Member of the Committee. Councilman Zeke Cohen, 1st District. We're also joined by, I'm going to take constructive criticism, feedback from Natasha Mihu and Nina Themlis, but Sophia, no, you're not supposed to tell me. Gabriot. Okay, on behalf of Mayor Brandon Scott, Matt Stegman and Nate Poole, on behalf of Council President Nick Mosby, and to my immediate right, Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee. Director Kearney, turn it over to you and your team. You have an approximate 30-minute presentation, and then we'll jump into questions.
I think so. Just a couple of opening remarks, if
Please.
You don't mind.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members, esteemed colleagues, and interested residents that might be watching. I want to start off first by thanking the members of council for the opportunity to discuss the FY2023 budget for the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. The budget hearing allows the opportunity to provide factual information about the budget and to answer questions that I'm certain we mutually hope will inform the constituents that we seek to serve. Secondly, I'd like to thank my amazing team for the hard work that they put in each and every day and for their dedication to the monitoring and accountability of the city's allocation of $641 million of American Rescue Plan Act funding, commonly referred to as ARPA. My goal for today's hearing is to help constituents understand spending plans for ARPA funding in FY23, and I'll remain focused on providing that information to our constituents. I've said many times before that ARPA is an opportunity to restore the lost faith in government, but only if that is what we collectively choose to do. My hope is that we decide to use hearings such as this as a way to help the residents that we seek to serve understand government operations and demonstrate accountability, and not for contentious conversation. We only further sow the seeds of division and underscore the worst of what is believed about the dysfunction of government. And now I'd like to speak directly to the residents of Baltimore City. Again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, that Baltimore is a city that had a lot of need prior to the public health emergency, and those needs were further exacerbated by COVID-19. $641 million is not enough money to address all of the city's needs, but it does provide us with an opportunity to help change the trajectory of the city. And in order to deliver on the changes that city government has collectively committed to you, we must employ an investment versus spending strategy and approach, and that strategy takes time. In addition, strategy does not always yield immediate impact and results. However, the Recovery Office and the administration are committed to demonstrating a return on investment through data and evaluation for the duration of the ARPA grant and thereafter. For those with questions, concerns, and/or interest in the use of American Rescue Plan Act funding, information and data are available for you to review. Please do not settle on secondhand information based on feelings and opinion about the use of these funds, or misinformation and mischaracterization that are developed to fit a narrative. Please visit arp.baltimorecity.gov, where we post all reports, detailed funding announcements, and a connection to our dashboard, which outlines committed funding by topic area. Despite the negative tone and tenor for which the Recovery Office is sometimes discussed internally and externally, please know that the process Baltimore City employs is gaining national interest. We receive emails from jurisdictions across the country requesting information and praising our process, methodology, dashboard, and more. I've been invited to participate in panel discussions and discovery sessions with the White House, the United States Department of Treasury, and organizations such as the Center for Accountability and Performance, the Greater Baltimore Committee, and the Association of Government Accountants, to name a few. We are changing the national narrative about Baltimore City with every investment and strategic decision. And we need everyone locally to also believe that change is possible and coming. With that, I will move into my formal presentation.
Hang on one second. We've been joined by Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton from the 6th District, and I'm just going to get it out of the way before he walks back in. Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District, member of the committee. Back to you, Director. Thank you.
So as a bit of a refresher, I want to ensure that we're all starting from the same point of knowledge. So I'll provide a little bit of an overview about American Rescue Plan Act funding and our general approach. As a reminder, President Biden signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan Act funding into law March 11th of 2021. In the interim, we were guided by an interim final rule, which was issued on May 17, 2021, which provided general guidance and information about how to implement American Rescue Plan Act funding. We received a final rule in January 6th of 2022. The U.S. Department of Treasury again allocated $641 million to the city of Baltimore and released guidance related to the use of those funds. Again, by way of reminder, all funds must be committed by December 31st, 2024, and expended by December 31st, 2026. Also, the Recovery Office was created or established in July of 2021 with our primary focus to oversee the use of funds and maximize impact for Baltimore City residents. The organizational structure is as follows. There's the Chief Recovery Officer, which I serve as, 3 project managers, 1 data project manager, a deputy director, accountant, budget analyst, program compliance officer, and community engagement officer for a total of 10 staff for the Recovery Office. Also want to be clear about the differences between the roles and responsibilities between the Recovery Office as well as those funded city agencies and or nonprofit organizations. The role of the Recovery Office, again, we're responsible for administering ARPA, and it's important to draw the distinction between the two. Agencies or other funded organizations are responsible for day-to-day operations of the use of grant funding and to make progress to complete funded projects. So that includes to determine overall strategy for funds, determine organizations with whom to partner, as well as determine how funding will be invested. The Recovery Office serves as the coordination, monitoring, and oversight function. So we monitor the progress towards the completion of projects, and we try to mitigate potential risk and assist where necessary with our partner agencies. Also want to go over our funding framework. Again, as a bit of a reminder, there are 5 eligible uses of funds. That includes public health, economic impact, premium pay, revenue loss, and broadband, water, and sewer infrastructure. Also want to provide an overview of ARPA funding. So we received the first tranche of funds in May of 2021. The second tranche is expected in June of 2022. The estimated allocations are broken down between the budget stabilization funds and recovery programs. There's $80 million to offset revenue loss, and then $10.6 million over the duration of the grant to fund the Recovery Office. That leaves a remaining balance of about $550 million for projects to be awarded to Baltimore City agencies, quasi-government agencies, and nonprofit organizations in accordance with the formal application process that we employed. Before we delve too deeply into the nuts and bolts of the FY23 budget, want to be clear on financial terminology so that we're again all on the same page. For purposes of reporting to the U.S. Treasury, what we mean by commitment is that a project has either an executed agreement and or a public announcement has been made. A commitment represents the total amount of the duration of the project. So on slide 9, our example is we made a commitment to MOED for $30 million for workforce development for an obligation. An obligation means the amount of funding available to spend during the fiscal year. We have some agreements that span over a number of fiscal years, therefore the obligated amount will increase over time. So by example, of that $30 million commitment that was made to MOED for workforce development, $3.7 million was budgeted for FY22, so that constitutes the obligated amount. An expenditure means that funds have been spent or charged to an ARPA account.
Director, can you hang on one second? We've been joined by Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District. Sorry to interrupt. We don't have the slides.
I don't see them in my inbox. Do we have these slides?
Government Relations, can someone email them the slide deck to me real quick, and then I'll distribute it or disseminate it to the committee?
Sorry to interrupt.
And also for just housekeeping for tomorrow, can you make sure there's just one email sent to me and Marguerite with the entire collection of slides for that day, if that makes sense? Okay, thank you very much, Director.
Again, an expenditure means that funds have been spent or charged to an ARPA account. So as an example, MOAD spent $305,000 through April 22 based on accounts that were charged to ARPA and was reported in the general ledger. So hopefully that clarifies the difference between commitment, obligation, and expenditure. But we have another slide. Thank you. So on this slide, it's a little bit more of a pictorial, if you will, that demonstrates the ARPA funding flow. So for city agencies, a city agency requires payment for an ARPA cost. They then charge an account that we've established for ARPA for agencies, and then an expenditure occurs. For a non-city agency or organization, that non-city organization must submit an invoice because they're not able to charge ARPA accounts directly. We pay the invoice using an ARPA account. We consider then that an expenditure, and then a funded organization can begin to spend money on the ground. So that's a general kind of high-level overview of the funding flow. Also want to do a bit of a recap of funding commitments. This slide demonstrates a timeline of funding commitments from the inception of the ARPA office in July of 2021 through May of 2022. You'll note that each of these have had some kind of funding announcement, whether it's something on our webpage or a public announcement via a press conference. But in this slide, we provide information on the dates of each of those funding announcements. So we've made a total of $481.2 million of commitments have been made across the various agencies and program areas since the inception of the ARPA office in July. Also, as an overview of funding commitments, for our COVID-19 health response, we committed $80 million to the Baltimore City Health Department, generally for vaccinations, testing, contact tracing, staffing and payroll, household food assistance, personal protection equipment, as well as communication and operational support. $25 million to the Economic Recovery Fund, which is with several fiscal agents, including funding for the Baltimore Civic Fund to provide nonprofit relief, to the Family League of Baltimore for child care provider relief, Visit Baltimore for hotel relief, Baltimore Development Corporation for small business relief, and BOPA for individual artist relief. Also, a total of $35 million to the Mayor's Office of Broadband and Digital Equity, for public Wi-Fi, to extend city fiber, to in-home broadband service, network operations, and our digital equity initiatives. Also, $50 million to the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement for job training assistance, community violence interventions, as well as for funding for the Visitation Center. $30 million for workforce development to the Mayor's Office of Employment Development for various workforce development programs, including Hire Up, Train Up, Youth Works, and workforce supports. Again, there's $10.6 million for the project management and compliance consulting services for the administration of ARPA, ARPA project and evaluation services at $600,000. That represents a partnership with the University of Baltimore and Morgan State University. $10.4 million in vaccine incentives to city employees who receive their COVID-19 vaccination, $11 million for food insecurity to the Department of Planning to provide produce distribution response, our online SNAP benefits or incentives, expansion of nutrition incentives at farmers markets, MedStar's Good Food prescription program, and the Farm Alliance's Black Butterfly Urban Farmer Academy program. Also $4.9 billion to Lexington Market to support stall build out for new and legacy vendors at the newly constructed market. $41 million to the Baltimore City Recreation and Parks for improvements to recreation center, pools, playgrounds, trails, and athletic courts. $75 million to the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services to include non-congregate emergency housing, shelter demobilization, housing navigation, and landlord recruitment, the Housing Accelerator Fund, as well as flexible funds for diversion and rapid resolution. $100 million for various housing initiatives that include protecting residents, preventing blight, as well as creating affordable housing initiatives. $4.8 million for a guaranteed income pilot program, which is $1,000 cash payments to 200 young parents between the ages of 18 and 24 years old over a period of 24 months. Also want to pause quickly to talk a bit about our focus on equity. As previously noted, the primary goal for ARPA investments is centered around equity. This means prioritizing areas that have been historically underinvested. One way that we're focusing on equity is through partnerships with Morgan State University and the University of Baltimore. These universities are providing research and data to better understand the impacts of the COVID-19 public health emergency. And the universities are assisting with the development of benchmarks and performance measures, as well as determining the appropriate areas of evaluation to demonstrate our return on investment. We also plan to show ARPA investments by various demographic measures, such as race, gender, and neighborhood, as long as that data is available. And we are asking our agencies to disaggregate or collect information based on that information to provide us an opportunity to show our focus on equity through those efforts. Also want to talk at a high level about the Recovery Office and our focus in FY23. We're committed to, we would like to commit the remaining amount of ARPA funds within fiscal year 23. Our plan is also to onboard all funded agencies and organizations and provide them with relevant information regarding more processes as well as those of the city. We'll continue to monitor expenditures against obligations for each agency or organization and our oversight of project implementation for all funded organizations, as well as provide technical assistance to funded organizations, which includes guidance on compliance with applicable federal regulations that includes the American Rescue Plan Act and other federal procurement requirements. So in slide 21, I'm providing a high-level budget overview for the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs. Again, this table demonstrates what we've already gone through individually, which is collectively the amount of funding that we've committed to various agencies and initiatives. The project budgets may be adjusted as needs arise and economic conditions change. It's important to note that the project budgets for these commitments may be adjusted because we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and there are a lot of challenges that we're seeing with regard to supply chain and labor shortages, as well as increased cost of materials. So project budgets may shift as economic conditions change as well. Speaking specifically to the budget for the Mayor's Office of Recovery Programs for FY23, our budget generally covers staffing costs, again, for 10 salaried employees, consultant support for the application process, and to provide technical assistance on the ARPA law, as well as other applicable federal regulations. In addition, other costs such as office supplies, office space, software, subscriptions, anything that might be necessary to help us with the administration of the ARPA grant. Moving specifically to the Baltimore City Health Department, the primary differences between FY22 and 23 is based on the timing of the grant award, as funds were not granted until October of 2021 and not with the full fiscal year of implementation. You'll also recall that in the oversight hearing, we've talked a bit about the fact that many costs at this time are still reimbursable by FEMA. So our plan is to continue to seek FEMA funding unless there are things that are not eligible per that law, then we would activate our ARPA allocation for the health department. For the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, again, this is a total $50 million allocation, but you'll see a $20 million obligation for FY23. The primary difference between FY22 and 23, of course, again, is still the timing of the grant, as funds were not awarded until October of 22. Also, I should note that there's a small error in the slide that where we have gun violence, it should say group violence, so please excuse that error. And then the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement has already selected 23 organizations with contracts totaling $17.9 million. That is over the duration of the grant. That is not for one fiscal year. There's also plans for additional grants to be made to CBOs in FY23. That includes 14 CBI expansion grants, 31 client-centered reentry service grants, 4 youth and trauma harm reduction and addiction grants, as well as 9 youth violence prevention grants. For job training and workforce development, the budget for FY23 is $11.7 million. Of note, MOED has executed all of their contracts, and enrollment for their Train Up program has started. There are multiple workforce support contracts that have been executed as well for legal services, adult education, and small business wage subsidies. In addition, you may note that MOED received both a state ARPA grant as well as a city ARPA grant. MOED has been doing remarkably well, and so has spent the majority and very close to expending all of their state ARPA grant, which means that additional supports will transfer to the city grant, I think this year, before the end of the fiscal year. And the plan is for all workforce programs to be fully operational in FY23. The Economic Recovery Fund, again, we have 5 fiscal agents. We've covered that information already. All funds will be dispersed to fiscal agents by the end of FY22. All committed funding to fiscal agents has been provided to 3 of the 5 fiscal agents already, with the 2 remaining fiscal agents to receive their funding by the end of the fiscal year. The intent to provide all committed funding to fiscal agents in FY22 is to get funding in the hands of subrecipients that are still navigating challenges associated with the public health emergency as quickly and as efficiently as possible. There are 2 fiscal agents that have already expended all of their funds. That would be Visit Baltimore as well as the Family League. The other 3 are still in the process of either evaluating grant applications or in the process of making award notifications to those that will receive disbursements. There's a part 2, sorry. So just a couple of highlights about Visit Baltimore and the Family League. So I noted that they've already expended all of their funds. That's 37 disbursements, or 37 awardees have received funds from Visit Baltimore, another 182 to child care facilities through the Family League. And BOPA, we expect to start to issue or make award notifications in June of 2022. For the Mayor's Office of Broadband and Digital Equity, the budget for FY23 is $3.7 million. The plan is to build out city fiber to BCRP recreation centers, and they've already started work at Middle Branch. There's a contract in place for the air-gapped network to protect security and bandwidth for public Wi-Fi. I won't pretend to be able to explain what that is, so I hope if you have questions, Director Hardebeck is here. A deployment of public Wi-Fi planned for the first quarter of FY23. Deployment of public Wi-Fi in West Baltimore neighborhoods should expand in FY23, and community engagement efforts will continue in partnership with OPI. For recreation and parks, the total amount awarded again was $41 million. You'll see that the majority of those funds are to be used in FY23. For a project overview, there are about 50 projects in total, 16 athletic courts, 20 playgrounds, 6 pools, 5 recreation centers, and 4 trails. Some of the work on projects is expected to begin before the end of FY22. Just also want to note that although all funds would be expended in fiscal year 23, that doesn't mean that all projects will be completed in FY23. There are some projects that are large in nature and also have multiple funding streams. So the disbursement from ARPA doesn't indicate that there's that the project is going to be complete within that fiscal year. Lexington Market, $4.9 million was provided for the stall build out at Lexington Market. All those funds are to be dispersed by the end of calendar year 22. And of course, we'll be monitoring all projects, but there was performance data that we're expecting from FY23, which will provide us with information on vacancy reduction and number of minority and women-owned businesses, merchant revenue, and jobs created. Also, the Guaranteed Income Pilot Program, again, provides $1,000 of monthly unconditional payments to 200 parents ages 18 through 24. Residents were able to apply to participate in the program in the first week of May. A total grant amount is $4.8 million. We expect for the first half of the total amount to be paid by the beginning of FY23. Food insecurity, the budget for FY23 is $3.9 million. These funds are for BIPOC local food production and to help build the local food production supply chain. Also an expansion of nutrition incentives at farmers markets, an increase in online SNAP participation, produce box distribution, as well as, again, the implementation of a produce prescription program at MedStar Harbor Hospital. That is the end of the formal presentation. Happy to take questions at this time.
Director, thank you so much. Can you go back to the broadband slide, please?
Back to the broadband slide. Is that the one you're referencing?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I appreciated your very honest response, by the way, about not explaining this or having Director Hardebeck do it. I do have a question I think you can answer. Do we know what Jason's total request was for this?
So what the total request was?
Yeah, around broadband and digital equity?
So when you say total request, separate from what the allocation is?
Yeah. So like am I reading that right, the 3.7?
Oh, okay, so there's $35 million in total has been committed. There's $6 million for phase 1, and then there's a $29 million for phase 2. Oh. Is there something I need to do to clear
You
that?
need to install the newest Windows feature update, according to the screen.
I don't know how to clear
No,
that.
I think Marguerite's going to go grab it. We're good. So, just going back to what we talked about last week in terms of the different definitions of words. So a total of 35 million was announced,
That's correct.
and how much has been transferred?
How much was that announced?
35 million total for broadband and digital equity.
Elizabeth is the project manager on that one, so she'll take it.
So yes, $35 million was publicly committed in an announcement, and then $6 million has been committed through an interagency agreement that went before the Board of Estimates and was approved.
Got it.
And so the office is fully authorized to spend that $6 million against an approved budget and project plan.
Got it. And just remind me real quick that $35 million total in commitments was made over at least, let me start over, sorry. The $35 million in total announcements was spread out over more than one announcement, right? Because I think the initial announcement was significantly smaller, right?
Phase 1 is for $6 million.
That was the first announcement.
Well, we talked about them in conjunction, but we talked about phase 1 being the start with the expansion to the recreation centers at $6 million. So some of the other initiatives that are a part of that.
Hang on, let me interrupt. I'm asking the question the wrong way. I'm sorry. There was an announcement made. It was like the third ARPA announcement, and it had to do with MOED and BDC and broadband. And that was the first time broadband was mentioned in an announcement, if my memory serves correct.
Broadband was a separate announcement on its own.
Oh, it was. Oh, maybe we were briefed on that as a package on the
That might be
council.
correct.
And, okay. All right. Either way, 35 million total, correct?
That's correct.
What was Jason's total request? Do we know what he requested in total?
I don't recall what he requested in total. We know that there's a number of initiatives that are funding broadband. So I think that it was certainly larger than 35 million, but the expectation is that some of these other funding streams will also be provided to help fund the broadband initiative.
So there are other agencies that are requesting things around broadband beyond Jason and/or BSIT?
No, when I say other funding streams, I mean there are other federal funding packages that are available, like the state has a broadband initiative, things like that.
Gotcha. Let me clarify my question. How much in ARPA funding did Jason request?
Off the top of my head, I don't recall.
Okay, can you get me a list of what Jason requested and for what activities or services or capital or whatever? But just, a line item list of, Jason needed these 6 things and they total X tens of millions of dollars. Just curious.
Okay.
Second question, can you go to the Rec and Parks slide? I think it was like 2F. Oh, it was one after. Okay, very good. Thank you. 6 pools. Those are all park pools, right? The larger pools?
I don't know. 1 second.
Can you read me the list of those 6? I think those are the larger. Colleagues, is there someone that can remind me? At Rec and Parks, we have 2 categories of pools. We have park pools and
Park pool.
neighborhood and park. Park are the bigger ones, right?
Parks does
Right.
pools?
Yeah.
So I can tell you the names. I don't know
Names
if
is
they're...
names is perfect.
Okay. Tawanda,
Yep.
Coldstream, Central Rosemont, Greater Model,
What was the last one?
Greater Model,
Okay.
William McGabee, I don't know if I said that right, Maccabee, thank you very much, and O'Donnell Heights.
And I think at least 2 of those are park pools, Tawanda and O'Donnell Heights. O'Donnell Heights is you. Tawanda is
Middleton.
Conway? Oh, that's Middle. Those are park pools, correct?
The only pools I got are
Yeah, mine is at Coulter.
potholes you can swim in.
Tawanda's neighborhood.
The rec center pool.
Oh, is O'Donnell Heights neighborhood or park?
I think it's park, right? I mean, it's
We have the
connected.
neighborhood names, but I don't
No,
know
no,
how
that's
they're
all right.
designated. Okay.
The only as Rec and Parks classifies them, I think the park pools are the bigger pools. The neighborhood pools are the smaller facilities. I'm curious as to the criteria used to develop that list. Specifically, if my memory serves correct, in late 2019, Rec and Parks did a capital assessment of all of their pools, and I think there was something like $27 million in required capital improvements at the 8 park pools. One of those pools is under construction, and I think opening up this year, which would be Druid Hill Park. It's open now? It was under construction all last season, correct?
It's opening next week.
It's not open.
It's opening next week.
Next week. Oh, got it. All right, so it's open. I mean, it's open next week.
Yeah, next week.
Okay, got it. Let me get to the heart of my question. Why isn't Riverside Park on that list? Do we know?
No, that's a question for the director.
Director of Rec and Parks.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. And last question along that line before I go to, I got Councilman Schleifer, then McCray, then Ramos, and Vice President Middleton. Actually, I was just advised Druid Hill Park pool opened yesterday. Excellent. Rec and Parks sent over some list of requests, and within that list of requests of 38 some odd million dollars, some portion of that is going to pools, right?
Correct.
And they requested X number of pools, and you guys agreed to fund Y number of pools. Maybe that X and Y equal the same number, I don't know. I'm curious as to specifically the criteria that you used to assess the original list that Rec and Parks sent over, and how you came up with the list of 6. So my question's a couple-fold. So now you know where I'm going. Question 1, what is the criteria, or request 1, what is the criteria by which you evaluated the request for pools, and that you made the determination to go with the Y number of pools, which is 6? And request number 2 is, can we see that original list that Rec and Parks submitted for your consideration? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, great.
But I want to be clear that we are the funding source. And so when an agency makes a request, they provide us with information based on things like a building assessment or things like that. Our criteria is simply, is it eligible under the law? We don't pick and choose about council districts or neighborhoods or things like that.
Who made the decision?
The director put forward information to us
Yep.
about priorities based on the conditions of certain.
Got it.
Certain-
Once you have the list, who takes the list and makes the decision?
We talk with the senior leadership team, identifies the priorities based on the conditions, if you will.
Director, let me ask the question very directly. Who makes the decision on which of the 6 pools to fund? What person or what group of people?
The senior team.
Senior team, so the CAO, the deputy CAO, the deputy mayors, and the chief of staff, correct?
The director, yes,
The direct.
Park and Recreation and Parks.
So okay, so let me say hypothetical. Rec and Park says I have 10 pools that I need renovated, and they submit that as part of their request for ARPA, and they've got other things in there, rec centers and tennis courts and so on and so forth, right? They submit a list of 10, but only 6 are funded. Someone made the decision that these 6 should be funded and the other 4 or however many should not be funded. My question is, who is the person or group of people? Does this make sense what I'm saying, Mr. Administrator? Who makes that decision? let me redirect the question to you. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does make sense, Chairman. The mayor makes these kinds of decisions.
Got it. With input from the senior team,
correct.
presumably after I don't want to say a recommendation, after input from the agency and input from the ARPA office, right?
To be clear, we are making decisions based on the allocation that we've received. And so ultimately, great weight is given to the director, who is ultimately saying to the senior team, these are the 6 facilities or 10 that are in the worst condition and that need the most support. And if funding allows, we are allocating the funding. And so if we are in a position, and we are certainly in that position now, where funding is extremely tight, then we are in a position as a team to have to choose what kind of investment we would be able to make if the ask is for more than what we can afford. We were not in that position because we made this allocation early on, and this is a top priority for the mayor.
Sure. For us too. So essentially you got, food for 10 people, but there's 15 people at the line, and I'm curious who makes that decision on the 10. So ultimately, it is the mayor's. So let me repeat what I said before, and you correct me if I don't have this right. The mayor makes a decision based on a recommendation and input from the senior team, which is based on a review of documentation and discussions and/or review of information from the agency, in this case Rec and Parks, as well as the ARPA office. In this case, the ARPA office is really just commenting on whether or not it's an eligible expense per Treasury guidance, correct?
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Questions answered. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Councilman Schleifer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I ask my question, I just want to make sure I get the baseline correct. First off, thank you, Director, for being here. How much money has been allocated to date?
$481.2 million.
We're pretty close this morning. You said 480, so that's very close. Good job, Bob. Thank you. So how much of the $480 million are going to directly to city functions that have been slowed or stopped during COVID?
Still in the process of deliberation. Those are conversations that we're still having with the senior team, but certainly there will be an allocation for the services that have been slowed.
No, but I'm saying of the 480 that's already been allocated.
None at this time.
Ooh.
You said for services.
Yeah. So has any money gone to?
Well, when you say slowed, define which services you're talking about.
So like, I'll give an example, and maybe we just answer this one directly. How much for recycling or street sweeping, has any money gone to that?
None to date.
Okay. So planning this morning said that we have a $1.3 billion shortfall of capital projects. How much of that $480 million of ARPA money is going towards those past due capital projects that they spoke about?
I'd have to see which list that you're speaking of with regard to outstanding capital requests. Certainly, we've committed a lot of money to capital through ARPA.
Gotcha.
So I'd need to reconcile the list that they're talking about, which may be different than requests that we've received. So I'd need to know which specific request we're talking about that equals the 1.3.
Sure. So that was, Chairman, that was a question you asked me to ask later on. So if we can make that a request, Nina.
Can you, 1 second, Councilman. I'm good on the question about what Jason requested on ARPA funding. So you can just 86 that question. Councilman Schleifer, can you repeat that, please?
So if Mayor's Office of Government Relations will, earlier today I asked the question when planning was presenting, they have a slide deck, and so I actually took a picture of it, but it's like sidewalk, some of the building infrastructure stuff from the city buildings, and it totaled about, they said $1.3 billion or $150 million a year for the next 20 years. So my request is to find out from that list, which I guess they'll get for you, how much of this $480 million went specifically to items that are on planning department's citywide capital budget, needed budget items. And my second question is how much money, you mentioned about the, from MOE, the job placements, I think it was about $11.7 million. How much money, how many jobs have been filled or trained for with that $11.7 million?
So what I also mentioned is that right now, MOA is spending their state ARPA grant. They have been transferred or transitioned rather to the city ARPA grant. But with regard to, you asked how many.
Yeah, like how many jobs like were produced, like or filled rather with that $11.7 million?
So I know for our higher up, there's a total of 220 participants that we're expected to fund, 110 in FY23 and the remainder in 24. If you're asking about specifically 22, I need to, let me see, do we have that? It's on our report, okay. So we don't have that yet. And again, we're not collecting information necessarily for what they're doing with the state ARPA grant. That's not our charge.
Gotcha. So, I mean, well, that's actually interesting. I did not realize that that we're talking both about the state and that we were comparing state versus city. So on that state one, if I heard correctly, maybe I got this mistaken, of the $11.7 million, that was for 220 people?
No, so for higher up, the expectation is to serve 220 participants.
Can we just go back to that slide first just to make sure I'm looking at the right thing? There we go. So I guess my question is, for all of the items listed, what are we anticipating? How many people are we servicing with $11.7 million?
220 participants total, 110 in FY23, 110 in FY24 for higher up. For train up, 138 participants total, 194 in FY22, 194 in FY23, and 450 in FY24. The increase is because the state ARPA grant will finish in FY23. For workforce development, for YouthWorks, 2,000 youth employed each summer under YouthWorks with city ARPA grant funds. And that's all of those are the three programs.
Okay. So the YouthWorks, that's $1,500 per kid, is that correct? Is that still the number?
Is that the number?
Is that still the number? Is it $1,500 per summer?
I think it's 1,600, what he said.
Not certain. I'd have to follow up about that because I think there may be some changes in that, but
Okay, so
I want to
that's-
confirm.
So that's like 3 million. And then the sum of the rest of them is 420. So is that about right, that it would cost about $20,000 for each person that is being helped in these programs?
I don't have a calculator, so I can't answer that.
Okay. All right. So if we can also just get that number, how many people we anticipate to serve with that $11.7 million and in each program, just so we can know how much it's costing for that.
I've already provided the answer to how many participants, so is the follow-up question how much per participant?
All right. So okay. So I guess I did the math. I mean, of the 2,000 you said from YouthWorks, we know that's about $1,500 per person. So that's $3 million. And then if we take the remaining $8 million, a little give or take, for the 194 and the 220, that would be $19,000 per person. Does that sound right?
So I'd offer a couple of other contextual pieces of information. So within workforce supports, that is not just job training, that is adult education, that is legal services, that is behavioral health services. For higher up, over 70% of those costs go directly to residents. So these are fully subsidized 6-month positions that are going to residents who are serving at either government or quasi-governmental agencies. And then for administration, along with sort of overall program oversight and coordination, there are also funds for a data warehouse, for participant referrals and other tools that help the entire workforce system to be more coordinated, more effective for both residents, training providers, and then businesses.
So thank you for that context. So are any of those ones that are going to city agencies, are any of them going to recycling or street sweeping in DPW?
So right now, the higher up program is being funded through state ARPA dollars. I believe that some residents will be serving with DPW. However, I can get back to you and confirm the number of positions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman McCray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Kearney, my questions are going to be centered around the public health response for COVID-19. I believe that would be slide 23 or 24.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Let me speak up. So, Director Kearney, my questions are going to be centered around the public health response to COVID-19, and I believe that's going to be slide 23 or 24. And my first question was regarding why did the vaccination funding decrease so dramatically from $8.4 million in FY 2022 to $2.2 million in FY 23?
The expectation is that the population will be more highly vaccinated. So we would have a less of a requirement for vaccinations because we will have more people that have been vaccinated. So that's part of the reason for the decrease in cost.
My particular concern around that is that we know that COVID-19 immunity, it decreases over time. And we may have new boosters that are coming for new variants that are coming. So I just want to make sure that we're obviously keeping that in mind. Thanks so much for your explanation. My next question, well, I guess my follow-up question would then be, with funding for our COVID-19 response shifting more towards ARPA from FEMA and CARES, what metrics are being used to ensure enough money is being allocated to the health department and corresponding agencies if new variants do arise, and if we have increased transmission or hospital rates increasing in the coming years?
So I mentioned earlier in the presentation that certainly these budgets are not static. Mm-hmm. This is an art and not a science right now. Let me be very clear with every member of the council. We are constantly in communication with our agencies, making sure that the budgeted amounts make sense. There is flexibility within budgets. If we have to move things around line items, we'll certainly do that to make sure that we're supporting whatever the initiatives or needs are that need to be met. And we have monthly conversations with our agencies, which includes BCHD, to make sure that we're meeting the needs. So there's flexibility within the budgets. These are not necessarily static.
Thank you. I just have one more question, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman, or do you have something specific to add to that? Is that all right, Councilwoman?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes, only, and I appreciate that question, the initial question very much. I think the question about vaccination is one that is important, and I've heard health respond to that question before. Do encourage that when their hearing comes up that they explain this further. There was considerable cost associated with setting up the infrastructure for vaccinations at the start of the pandemic. What health believes and what health is certainly working towards is that healthcare providers and others will take a much greater role in the vaccination efforts in the future. And so, where public organizations had to stand up infrastructure to provide for vaccinations last year, health is expecting that individual health providers will do considerably more if we are in a position, well, not if, where we are providing for boosters in years to come, that our individual providers will play a much larger role in that process than they have. Again, I want to encourage that health gets an opportunity to expand on that, but certainly that is what I've heard from them. We do not expect that our systems will be expected to do what we did to stand up the initial vaccination effort.
Heard. Is our allotment of ARPA funds going towards the direct COVID-19 response, is that similar to like comparable jurisdictions or similar jurisdictions as Baltimore?
When you say comparable to other jurisdictions, are you talking about the amount that we've allocated? We're in the process of doing
Director, hang on one second. Councilwoman, are you also saying comparable size jurisdictions?
Yes.
So we're in the process of doing that analysis with our university partners. We're asking them for benchmark information. We're looking at cities that are comparable in size or are close to this jurisdiction to make sure that we're in alignment with what other jurisdictions that are comparable are doing. So I don't have an answer for you right this moment, but just know that we are certainly working towards that and making sure that we have an understanding of what jurisdictions around us are doing, as well as those of comparable size.
Since you brought up the university partners, would you be able to provide just a brief update on where we're at with Morgan State, with the University of Baltimore, and the research that they're doing? I know one of the questions from my constituents was, when would we be able to have access to the information? I told them that obviously this is going to be over a few years, but could you just provide a brief update on it?
Sure. So with Morgan State University and the University of Baltimore, we're leveraging information that they've already collected, neighborhood level information and demographic information, to make sure that we have a true understanding of the impacts of COVID-19 on Baltimore City. So we're looking at information such as, what were the hardest hit industries? Where do we anticipate more or less job loss? How are we aligning job losses and with some of our investments around workforce development? We've already started to provide the council with information, geocoded information, on where we have provided child care grants and things of that nature from our fiscal agents, and working with the University of Baltimore and Morgan State University to identify, are these the areas that, based on the data that is available, that are the hardest hit and where we are seeing a greater need. So we're certainly working towards providing information at a more granular neighborhood level. That is something that is going to take time, but we're certainly working towards that. And so, again, leveraging information like the equity report that the University of Baltimore put together for our planning department around capital investments, and making sure that we're layering that on top of our decision making. So we're moving in that direction, and certainly plan to provide information at a neighborhood level and also by other demographics to the extent possible.
Thank you, Director Kearney.
Thank you.
Director, Mr. Chair, just tap me on the shoulder and I could start talking. So thank you, Director. I noticed in the slides there's nothing about FY 2023 for housing.
So in the executive summary as well, in the executive summary, we have a statement about working through the budgets with housing as well as with MOHS. So when we did our public announcement for the $100 million allocation, we had some numbers that were assigned to different buckets. We're now working with the housing department around what those numbers will look like per fiscal year. I mentioned some of the challenges around shortages in supply chain and things of that nature. And so we're trying to get some realistic numbers, as realistic as possible, around what we can actually commit to doing in FY23 and in the subsequent fiscal years. So we're still in the process of working on that with the housing department to identify what their fiscal year by fiscal year budget will be within that allocation amount.
Can we get that for, this is a request, Marguerite, can we get that to the committee then, the housing and also MOHS, in terms of what the 2023 budget will be?
Certainly our plan is to provide that information. It just wasn't available in time enough for the production or publication of the budget book or for the hearing. These are going to be iterative conversations. So I do want to make sure that I'm not creating the expectation that we'll have this within 2 weeks, which is what our normal requests or deliverables are. It's going to take us a little bit of time to massage, but we're certainly happy to brief you on our progress with both of those organizations as we work towards finalizing their budgets.
Yeah, that would be super important, because particularly for some of the projects that were listed in the housing, some of those are like ready to roll,
Yeah.
I think, and I hope anyway. So we do want to see, and I know residents want to see some action on those pieces. So it would be great to get that follow up.
Yes.
So, okay, great, I appreciate it. And then, my second question was, there's obviously a lot here that you're, managing, and every time you come before us, there's some, new way of projecting the data, which I appreciate, because then we can see it in different ways. So with the 2023 comparisons and the budget, you'll be giving that to us every quarter when you come to us in terms of what the budget was and what was spent, and, any issues that have,
So in the oversight hearings, we definitely provide information on obligations and expenditures by project. That's what's required of Treasury. So we already provide that information, but if there's another way that you'd like for us to present it, we can certainly do that as well. But we do already provide that information.
okay, yeah, that's it. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. Vice Chair Middleton?
Greetings, Director Kearney.
Greetings.
First question, the homeless disbursement slide. I saw there was something that said landlord recruitment.
Let's see. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Somewhere.
Is that what you were referencing?
Landlord recruitment. I've never heard of that before. Can you kind of explain what that is?
Sure. So one of the things that MOHS has talked about is the unavailability of housing units. And so one way to create more housing unit availability is by working with landlords and providing them with some type of incentive payment for them to make their units available for transitional housing for our unhoused population. So it would be to incentivize landlords to make their units available.
So how much was allocated of the total funding, and what does the funding go to? Is it subsidized for the landlord?
Hold on, I'm looking up my notes. And could you repeat your question, please, again?
How much was allocated of the total funding, and what does the funding go to? Is it subsidized for subsidy for the landlord?
It's okay. Oh, sorry.
Madam Vice President, the homeless services team did such a good, thorough job building out their homeless funding strategy that I would encourage that we hand that question to them. I'm sure that Director has a lot to say about how they broke down the funding by type and what the actual need is. We had a lot of community participation in that process in terms of how we broke out the funding need. So if it's okay, I would just want to give them an opportunity.
Yeah, it caught my eye. And
Certainly, I can provide the funding amount, but the specifics in terms of subsidy and things like that is probably a better question for the director. But the cost that we have included right now is about $3 million, but still working and negotiating and working with the with MOHS around what final numbers might look like.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director, and appreciate you coming to Baltimore and taking on a very, very difficult task. I've heard some discrepancy within agencies around technical assistance on how ARPA can be allocated, is allocated. It seems, and this is my own sort of anecdotal analysis, but it seems like some agencies are very able to get money moving pretty quickly and some much less so. So I'm curious from your office, how much standardized technical assistance is there for agencies to be able to understand their allocation? Because again, in working with some agencies, they kind of know the process. In working with others, they don't. And so just trying to understand how we are messaging to them how to move money efficiently and effectively.
Sure. So we meet with funded agencies once a month. We have where we have conversations about our obligations and expenditures against those obligations. We raise flags if there's anything that we're not seeing that we know based on conversation is something that should have hit an ARPA account and hasn't. If there are errors in accounting, we also share information with them about that to make sure that we reconcile those errors. We also speak with them about procurement. We provide a variety of technical assistance, not only from us, but also from our consultants. We're in the process of developing a 2 CFR 200 training so that we can make sure that everyone who is funded through ARPA is aware of the federal procurement laws, which do differ from those of the city. So we do provide a lot of hands-on assistance to agencies. All of the project managers that are here sit in on multiple meetings besides just the ones that we have on a monthly basis to make sure that we have an understanding of their project goals and how they're moving towards implementation of those goals. And we do our best to also raise any questions around risk. If you're starting a project this late, are you certain that you're going to be able to finish within the time frames that you've allotted? If not, where would we best move those funds, or how can we best assist you in moving those funds? Certainly, we do have a few administrative challenges in terms of staffing. We have a small office, and the offices that are responsible for our financial transactions are also multitasked. So we're working towards those solves as well, but certainly provide a lot of hands-on assistance to agencies.
I appreciate the response, and I would just push that it does seem like, again, there's some agencies that have learned how to work your system pretty well and seem to be moving money or at least getting ready to move money, and others that it seems to be a lot of fits and starts.
And I will say to that I want to be clear that commitments don't always mean disbursements. So we do have some agencies that have announced awards to organizations, but they're still BOE processes, there's still contracting process or procurement processes. So a commitment is not the same as a disbursement. So I want to make sure that we make that clarification, because an announcement doesn't mean that that's money in the hands of an organization.
No, understood. Second question relates to nonprofits and the disbursements there. Again, I've heard some concern among organizations that did not win funding that when they asked for an explanation as to why, the explanation was a little wobbly, and that there wasn't sort of a great metrics or clarity of response. Obviously, if someone applies for something and does not get it, they're gonna have some residual frustration, but I've heard from a number of constituents, as well as folks outside my district, who applied, didn't get it, and were not satisfied with the response that they got back from the office as it relates to understanding where their application went off base. Could you just walk through a little bit of how you all are responding to folks who reach out after they've been denied?
Certainly, and I would assert that anyone who received a denial or a no is not likely to be satisfied with anything that we say about why they didn't get funding, so I want to start there.
Sure.
But certainly we are providing information to any organization that has reached out to us via email or mostly via email. We have provided explanations about where there was some lack in the application. And let's also be clear that there were a lot of applications. There were a lot of very well-written applications. And so a denial does not always mean that something was done wrong, but there were certainly other factors that we considered as well in determining who would move forward. And so information that we provided generally was if there was information about the budget that didn't make a lot of sense to us, if budget numbers didn't align, if an organization provided information about existing programs or services, but then their budget didn't align with the narrative. We provided feedback about that. If there were questions about program income, which there were some proposals that we received that that may have required or that may have resulted in program income. All of those funds still have to be spent by the end of ARPA. And so we had questions and we shared that with organizations about what would the plan, lack of plans around spending program income. There were a variety of things that we've replied back to organizations, and I hear you when you use the term wobbly, but I would say that we certainly employed a very evaluative lens on all of the applications or proposals that we received. And even some of the most worthwhile ones or ones that were well written didn't get funded. And so it's not always necessarily the quality of the application. Some of it, there might have been some other factors as well. We've talked about equity quite a bit. If an organization received federal funding from multiple other streams, we want to make sure that we're touching organizations that may not have received any federal funding thus far, so that may have been a factor. And we also shared that information via email as well, or in our explanation to organizations. We still have a few organizations that we have not been able to respond to yet, but we're making our way through the queue, so anyone who hasn't heard from us will.
Was there a standardized set of metrics that you were able to provide folks on why their application was denied?
When you say a standardized set of metrics, there's certainly the evaluation criteria that we shared with our evaluation team. Any of the information that we've provided back to applicants has been a summary of whatever we received back from the review teams.
Okay.
So you recall that there's kind of the 7-point criteria.
Yep.
That was used to evaluate proposals, and so we've summarized that.
And did you score based on any sort of quantitative metrics? Like did you provide a numerical?
We didn't provide numerical. We provided a summary of the written commentary that was provided.
Okay.
The system that we use doesn't easily allow us to provide that information, so it was easier to do the summary analysis than it is to try to print or record each individual evaluator for each proposal that was where we had a request for feedback.
When folks got rejected from ARPA proposals, did you all steer them either to other grants that the city provides, or even, I know some folks, like for example, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, the Office of Digital Equity, had their own fund that they were able to disperse. So when someone got the rejection letter, did the office steer them toward a potential place that they could apply within an agency? And then second question or follow-up there is, if not, why? So if, for example, if an organization seemed to have a digital equity-oriented mission and they got rejected from your process, did you steer them to Mr. Hardebeck?
So we had interagency collaboration where we shared the proposals that we received by topic area. Like, for example, if we received something around digital equity or broadband, we shared those proposals with the director. We did not say to an organization, you should reach out to Director Hardebeck. What we have also done, though, is that we, in our response, we have a link on our website that provides information on other funding opportunities, and we made sure that we reference that page in our response. And so we are continuously updating that page to provide information on additional funding opportunities. But in terms of, did we reach out to an organization and say, please reach out to Director so-and-so? No, but we did share the proposals with the director, and if they wanted to reach out to some of those organizations, they were certainly able to do so.
Okay. I mean, just to me, it would strike me as it would make sense to give that feedback to folks so that they're at least aware that there is another.
Those funding opportunities are on that page that I referenced. So any other, like a Monzi, their community grant process, we have that information on our website. So we might not have said, please reach out to Director Jackson for this particular grant opportunity, but we said these are a list of the grant opportunities that are available, and if you think that your organization is in line with those opportunities, feel free to apply.
Understood. I heard from a number of folks who were rejected and then fit into one of those categorizations, and I ended up steering them toward apply to Jason, apply to Monsi. I think it would be relatively easy for your office to do so, and just given that there's a lot of applications and they're relatively easy to group, I think that would be a good feedback, a good set of feedback for folks to have. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Conway stepped out. Councilwoman Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Kearney, I had a quick question about small business funding commitments. Do we have any commitment to small businesses, getting them back on track?
So through our Economic Recovery Fund, one of the organizations that we're using as a fiscal agent is the Baltimore Development Corporation. The Baltimore Development Corporation is providing technical assistance as well as other relief to small businesses. And so there's been $4 million that's been dispersed to BDC to date. About 221 businesses will receive funding totaling $4.7 million, and then another $3.5 million has been received by businesses to date.
I'm sorry, ma'am, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Are those businesses that are on their roster for BDC? Because we've known that BDC, sometimes their businesses kind of constitute in the white L. I'm looking for more businesses in the black butterfly.
So we specifically have provided criteria that businesses need to be in a qualified census tract or not have received other federal funding. So they're not necessarily in the white L. We've added that layer of criteria to make sure that we're touching minority businesses.
Okay. Is it possible to get a list of the businesses that you all have dispersed funds to?
It's in the council report in the appendix. We have a list, and we also have a map that identifies where each of those locations are. I'll note that for some organizations, well, really that's more so for like the hotels that are listed. If they might have used their corporate office, and so if they did, that's going to be what's represented in the map.
Okay.
But for small businesses, because BDC hasn't, we don't have that information mapped yet, do we, for BDC? Sorry. The small business grants to BDC, we don't have that mapped yet, but we do have. Okay, it is mapped. So it is in the last council report, and it will be also in the report that we'll be providing for the month of May.
Okay.
A little.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so it will be in the May report.
Yes, okay,
There we go,
perfect.
sorry.
No worries. And then what constitute, just following up on that question, as far as economic recovery, what specific criteria are you all using when small businesses apply for the funding? So what are they using it for? Are they using it for wages, for essential workers? Are they using it for PPE?
All of the above.
All of the above, okay, perfect. And then with regard to investing in water, sewage, and broadband infrastructure, one of the main things that that I'll be concerned on, and I know many of my colleagues are concerned about the infrastructure of our water and sewage system. So can you speak to kind of like you all's plan of investment in the water and sewage system?
So I want to ask CAO Shorter if he'd talk about that a little bit, because I think the infrastructure bill is where we'll see some investment around water and sewer, but I want to allow CAO Shorter to speak more to that.
And the only reason why I bring it up is because in the final rule, it was used kind of infrastructure, water and sewage in the final rule from the Treasury. So
I appreciate that question, and I know we talked extensively about it this morning. Water, wastewater, broadband and digital equity, environmental stewardship, these are all primary sort of core areas of investment for the Infrastructure Act. So we stand to certainly receive what we've received via the Recovery Act through infrastructure, that is an allocation partially, but also through competitive grant awards from federal agencies. And so what Director Kearney is sort of why she handed it over to me is really because we believe we'll be able to make significant investments in our water and wastewater infrastructure through the Infrastructure Act.
okay. So just confirming, you're not using that sentiment of the bill, and you're reallocate or reinvesting into the infrastructure bill that's coming out?
We believe we'll make
Much more maximum
a
impact.
better, it'll be a better use of the resources to focus in on the Infrastructure Act investment or allocation versus leveraging the limited funds associated with the Recovery Act.
Okay.
Yep.
And then my last question has to do with sustainability. I asked in a previous hearing about how you all are developing sustainability metrics for these organizations and agencies to kind of preclude after these funds are done.
So there are performance measures that are part of our grant agreements that we're tracking. And then I mentioned earlier that we are working with the University of Baltimore and Morgan State University to identify metrics post-award. So we're in the process of identifying our criteria for what will be what I'll call post-evaluation and how long we will follow some of these investments. Certainly, we have organizations that are planning to do their own surveys and things like that to make sure that we understand the extent to which ARPA funding allowed businesses to stay open or any other type of benefit that they are achieving through ARPA investments. So there's kind of a combination approach. Some of our funded fiscal agents are doing surveys. We're also working with the universities.
Okay, and does that also align with agency investment as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're working to identify, we can't evaluate everything, so we're developing some criteria to determine which ones we want to track and how.
Okay, and will they be reflected in FY23, or when do you project that they'll be reflected in the
I
budget?
think that will.
As far as the performance metric.
So the performance metrics won't be done by then, but certainly the criteria in the beginning of evaluation can
Yes.
probably start for some things in FY23.
Okay.
Some things are probably better post-evaluation, like your guaranteed income pilot. You'll want to see after the duration of the 2 years.
Yes.
But there are some things that we'll be able to track and provide information on in the interim.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Schleifer is next, and then Stokes.
Thank you. So about the guaranteed income program that was listed on there, is there any report or requirements that you guys are going to have or that you're requiring them to follow in order to make sure that there's integrity behind how the drawing takes place? It's my understanding that 4,000 people applied for it and 200 people are going to get it. I've learned a little bit more about how the process is going to work for the drawing, and unfortunately there's too much room for human manipulation in it, and I just want to know if there were certain things that are required before you guys doled out this, $4.8 million, if they have to report to you guys or show you how the process is working or not.
Yes, they do have to talk to us or provide information on how the process is working. We are not responsible for the randomization or the random selection, but certainly they do have to share that information with us.
Is there any way for somebody on your team to be present for that drawing for when it takes place, since you guys are a major stakeholder in it?
I'm sure we could, but we'll have to follow up with MLCFS on when they actually plan on doing the drawing or determining the randomized families that will be selected.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful for somebody, for a human that we know to be present for it. I've requested to be present for it, to be able to witness it, happen to know a thing or two about how these drawing systems and software work. And so it would be nice to have somebody in there who could answer some questions after the fact.
So noted.
Thank you. Oh, and one other thing. So, in going back to some of our previous ARPA hearings, I know we spoke at length about some of the grants that took place, but if you can go back to the slide, there was one where it said about Visit Baltimore, Family League, and BOPA.
That
Okay.
was the slide that was showing
Yeah.
in this one. Is this the one?
Yes, thank you. So are these grants, these funds that have been dispersed through these programs, is there a uniform process they're following? Are they following the same process Monsi's following? Are they doing their own process? Like, how does...
I'm not
So
certain
like
what you
these,
mean.
all right, so like let's take Visit Baltimore for a second. So they dispersed 37 awards. Did those 37 people and then some who applied have to follow the same application process, answer the exact same questions, provide the exact same information that the people who got the 182 awardees from the Family League or the money that Monsi has awarded?
I don't know how all those questions would apply. We're talking about hotels, child care centers, and CBOs that are providing violence intervention services. So I'm not certain that there's a uniform set of questions that they should answer, but they are to provide information on any losses, and we have to make sure that it is an eligible use and things of that nature, but I don't know that there's a standardized question that would work in all those circumstances.
Sure. So is your team the one that, like, did you guys create the application and process for them? They created their own?
That's correct.
So on these other tracks, so we know that Monsi has a separate track. So you're saying that each one of these groups have their own separate process and application and formula on how they make decisions?
So my comment pertains to the Economic Recovery Fund and not to MOTSI. But for the Economic Recovery Fund, before we issued any contracts or interagency agreements, we came up with the list of criteria, the eligibility criteria, and the prioritization criteria, and required them to apply those in whatever application process they chose to establish. So we set the ground rules, and then they moved it from there.
So what are some of those things, if you can give us examples?
You had to be located in a QCT. You had to let us know.
In a, what's a
a
QC?
qualified census tract, sorry.
Okay.
If you had received federal funding from another funding stream, whether that was PPP or CARES or some other thing, we wanted to know if it was a minority or,
Director.
I'm sorry.
A little closer.
I'm sorry.
The folks at home,
Laid 'em.
I know the folks at home are very interested
My
in
blood
hearing
sugar
about
level's going down, I
ARPA.
apologize. We also asked if they received federal funding prior, if they were a minority or woman-owned entity or business. There were questions about loss and also use of funds to make sure, that, again, that it was eligible.
So if they got federal funds, then they didn't get these, or you just wanted to know?
We wanted our fiscal agents to prioritize those that did not. In some cases, that couldn't be. In the case of our child care centers, some had already received funding before, but we're still struggling because enrollments had not increased, so we did not make that a barrier to receiving an award.
Gotcha. Okay, so basically, there's, I guess now, if I'm keeping track, there's 4 different tracks on people getting funds for this and the process in which it takes place, right? There's Monsi, Visit Baltimore Family League, and BOPA. Is there any other entity that's doling out this money?
It's all 5 fiscal agents, and then some of the city agencies like Monsi that have community-based organization grants.
Councilman, hang on one second. You said 5, you said 4. Is the 5th, is that BCF? Or,
No,
I
5
don't
is
know who
them.
you
The
named.
5th is them.
No, there are 5 fiscal agents.
can you name those for me real quick?
Baltimore Development Corporation,
Oh, so that's
Baltimore Civic Fund, BOPA, Family League, and Visit Baltimore.
So the discrepancy in that list was, Councilman, you had 4 and you had Monsi in there?
No, I was missing BDC.
BDC and Baltimore Civic Fund.
Yeah, so then that would be 6.
But you had Monsi. I just
Yes.
want to make sure. Okay, so no Monsi, but yes on Civic Fund and yes on BDC.
Yes, on what? I'm
Have
now
you-
confused.
So I think
Wait,
they're.
hang on 1 second. Sorry to interrupt. Councilman said 4 entities. The 4 entities that he named were
Those 3 in Monsi.
those 3 in Monsi. What the director is saying is the 5 fiscal agents are those 3 plus BDC plus Baltimore Civic Fund.
That's correct.
So
Okay,
then
I
what?
just want to clear up the discrepancy. Y'all can take it from here, but
So then Monsi, is Monsi the 6th, or are they?
If you are qualifying or classifying entities that have the ability to make grant awards, yes, they would be a 6th.
Gotcha. I don't recall, and doesn't mean I didn't get it, I just don't recall getting anything on the BDC. Have you guys gotten the list of where BDC awarded funds to?
We provided information about the Economic Recovery Fund in a briefing to include all 5 fiscal agents that would be providing funding.
Okay, so I mean, I just don't
It's
recall.
in the council report that
Okay, so-
is required to be submitted monthly.
Okay, so if you don't mind, if you can just like have somebody forward me the email so I can see which one, like who BDC gave money to also.
It's in the council report,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, which report?
the one that is required for us to submit monthly.
Okay, I'll go back and look at it. And have you guys sorted through the question that we had last time about, you know, there was one business that received money. We're still waiting for the report on, we were told that the reason that everybody was a nonprofit and there was just one business that received money from Muncie, that business has a great track record with the city, has done multiple other deals with the city, and so therefore that's what makes them unique. We were told at that hearing that we would get the reports of other programming they did for the city, you know, the after action reports, and we were told that we'd get that in time for budget hearing. I just want to know when we're going to be getting that.
That's a question for Director Jackson. My understanding is that she was going to provide that information today, since today is the day that we were to provide follow-up responses from that hearing.
Gotcha, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Stokes.
Director, I don't have a whole lot to ask because most of the questions I have, wanted to ask, they already been answered, but I just want to thank you for that thorough report. I know we had some questions about money spent and money assigned to different agencies, and you did come back with that information, so I just want to thank you for that thorough report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues? Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also following up on what my colleague was talking about, follow-ups from the last hearing, would we be hearing from, my brain is melting after today, and it's only day one. The DPW on the issue of whether or not we can use ARPA money to fund the Water for All.
Written responses were submitted before I came today, so that should be in your inbox.
Okay. I will look for it. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then the other question I had will be asked on behalf of my colleague who is not here, if I can find my slides. He had a question about the healthcare funding, so I'll find it and I'll ask it later. Sorry, I didn't have it pulled up, but I know Councilman Burnett had a couple of questions that he wanted to ask.
Councilwoman Porter?
Thank you. And Councilwoman Ramos, I'm in the document as well, so I can use my two questions to ask the remaining
Okay,
two.
great,
Yeah,
thanks.
no worries. So from Councilman Burnett, we know that the pandemic is far from over. Are there any funds being held or reserved or even temporarily restricted should an additional wave of COVID or COVID mutation cause another period for the shutdown?
At this time, we're not restricting any funding, but I just make note again that much of the current costs related to COVID-19 response is still FEMA reimbursable. We expect for that reimbursement to continue, although it will be at a step down, which means that much of the funding that has already been allocated to the health department would be available in subsequent fiscal years.
Okay, wonderful. And then, let's see. The other questions were answered, so no more questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Schleifer?
Yes, thank you. So we have about $200 million left to go. So what's the game plan for the remaining money between what's been allocated and what's not allocated? Do you have like a breakdown of what the plan is for the remaining monies?
No, I don't want to get out in front of the administration, certainly the mayor or the CAO, but those conversations are ongoing. We know that there's still some holes and some gaps that need to be plugged and filled, and so we're continuing to have those conversations and determining what the priorities are around the remaining funding.
Gotcha. So I guess maybe I can ask this to the city administrator. Is there like, because I know the mayor had released specific outlines framework for these funds. So is there specific like categories that you guys are still that hasn't been discussed yet? I know obviously the top priorities, the mayor dealt with, first and foremost, the public safety, the health. I don't recall all the pillars off the top of my head, forgive me. But is there specific topics, or are you guys just kind of seeing like how this plays out? Maybe some of the money will go to things that already were funded that need more funding, or you're looking for new things? What's kind of the mindset now? And
No, I appreciate the question. What I would say, we are now at a point where we've received enough requests from our government and from community organizations where we are certainly, what is the word, overbooked, if you will. At this point, I think we are, as a team, making decisions based on the requests that we've received, and we're attempting to do that in the most balanced way possible. And so we are working together. I don't believe, it certainly won't be a mystery as we begin to make those decisions. We'll certainly make sure that it is in the monthly reports submitted to council through the recovery office. We do not at this point have any pre-designated programs or service areas that I'd be able to talk about today.
So there's not going to be like a randomized drawing like the guaranteed income for the remainder of who we're going to serve with the rest of the money?
No.
Well, that's good. That's good to hear. So are you guys are you open to, is there any opportunity for the council to, to weigh in on some of that, or because I mean, a lot of it happened very quickly. The first stuff that came out, I think we didn't really know the timeline. So maybe it didn't happen quickly. Maybe it happened slower, than you wanted, but a lot quicker than we had expected. So being that we're kind of in that holding period, you still have like time to figure it out, right? Don't we have another like couple years before we have to, spend the money? So is there an opportunity for the council to weigh in on some of that, or an allocation that you guys are looking for feedback from the council? Because I know the different agencies weighed in, but is there an opportunity for us to weigh in on that?
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, two responses. One, the office will certainly be transitioning to more of a monitoring posture. So we will not use the entire few years up to 2024 or 2026 and something to disperse funds. I would leave it to the director to talk about what that transition will look like in terms of the office focusing on the spend and implementation of programs. The second thing I'll say is that I believe the mayor is always open to hearing from you, and the door is always open for that continuous engagement and communication. Don't want to ever close that door, but I believe it's fair to say that we have received at this point enough requests for funds for us to be in a position where it's decision time and not necessarily there isn't enough time. I would say we don't have a whole bunch of time to make decisions. We're making decisions constantly, and so if there is a need to have continued discussion, it'll be because of underspend, not because of where we are now.
Gotcha. So basically, with the you got $160 million left. So you're saying, like, for instance, like a rec center in the only rec desert in the city, costing 10% of that is still something that would still be an option to discuss.
No, what I'm saying is that we have, as you've articulated yourself this morning, enough requests, that is to say city services, community organizations and nonprofits, other programs and services in the hopper that we are evaluating and measuring now, that there isn't in my mind, a lot of room for us to maneuver in terms of additional funding. So while it may look like 160 million is still remains, what I will say, and the director could probably say this better, is that we have requests that far exceed that number, and so we are still in a bit of a crunch in the sense that we have a lot of requests that are legitimate requests for funds, and we have some difficult decisions to make in the coming weeks and months.
Gotcha. So one last question, then I'll defer to you to talk about the transition. But is there when you said you're transitioning into like monitoring to see how things are going, has there been any conversation about possibly seeing like, well, certain things we're doing are working really well, so that needs a little bit more, and certain things we're doing are not working as well, so let's cut that, even though we said maybe, hey, we're going to give 50 million here, but really it only needs 40 million, but that extra 10 million can have a lot larger impact over here. Is that still possible, or whatever was put out is set in stone and is gonna go through to the end?
It's too early to say. I mean, I think the agencies and organizations that have taken their time, energy to put together proposals believe they can spend the funds and make the impact that they've committed to. We believe that they can as well. We are too early in the process at this point to say that they can't. And to talk about underspend or redirecting funds would almost undermine the process, if you will, that we've taken organizations and our own partner agencies through. So a bit too early to go down that road.
Okay, thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions? Director, we had some issues with the vehicle fleet from BPD, and I know there were discussions early on about how to address some of those challenges. Can you talk about the extent to which BPD made a request for ARPA funding to assist in efforts with, maintaining and upgrading the fleet?
Sure. We were provided a proposal that had a couple of different options. You've heard the CAO Shorter talk about kind of being oversubscribed, if you will, with the number of requests that we have both from city agencies as well as from nonprofit organizations. We've had conversations with BPD. The mayor has committed to providing some fleet and addressing some of those issues, but we're still in the process of finalizing what that looks like in terms of timing. I think one of the concerns is that even if we purchase the vehicles, that we might not have them, that we have to order the vehicles. And I think there was some conversation that we had about how we pay for them and if they're outfitted in all the things that they need to be in time enough for the end of ARPA, if that makes sense, because there's a little bit of a backlog in production of cars and things like that. So we've been having conversations with BPD to make sure, or we had a conversation with BPD to make sure that any orders that we made would be provided to us in time for ARPA. But the mayor has committed to addressing some of the fleet challenges.
Got it. All right, thank you. Before we wrap up for today, I want to take a moment of personal privilege as chair of the committee. Almost 2 weeks ago, I stood with several of my colleagues to stress the importance of combining the long-term crime reduction plan with immediate solutions to ensure our citizens, visitors, and businesses are safe. Since that time, we've had a number of profoundly disturbing incidents involving seniors and youth being victimized by gun violence in broad daylight. Something must change, and immediately, as this council begins hearings on public safety. I will be particularly focused on both the short-term and long-term solutions necessary to keep our communities safe. That may require a change in personnel if the current results are not sufficient. With that, I want to thank everyone for today. We are now in recess, and we'll see everyone tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Thank you.
Thank you.